Chapter 1. The First Fear, Ancient Anxiety About Fertility. Picture it, the banks of the Tigris 4,000 years ago. The air is heavy with the smell of wet clay, goats bleating in the distance, the hum of insects rising as dusk creeps in. A woman, young by our standards, but already bearing the weight of too many pregnancies, steps barefoot across the packed dirt floor of her family's home. Her belly is flat now, but only just. Her last child was born months ago, and her body has not yet recovered. She kneels before a small shrine carved into the wall, lays out a tiny clay figurine, and whispers words we'll never know, words of pleading, words of fear. What is she asking? Not for a child. Not this time. She is praying for the absence of life, for her womb to rest, for her husband's touch not to bring another mouth that will cry for milk she no longer has. And here's the great irony of history. While modern minds often assume ancient people wanted as many children as possible, the truth is far more complicated. From the moment humans understood the link between sex and birth, they feared what uncontrolled fertility could mean. Too many children could kill a mother, starve a family, or collapse a fragile household economy. So the first contraceptives weren't just medical, they were magical. Amulets, spells, and the terror of the unknown. Let's linger for a moment on that clay figurine. Archaeologists have found countless charms in Mesopotamian ruins, small statuettes, carved stones, amulets worn against the chest. Many were dedicated not to fertility, but to its opposite. Imagine the atmosphere of those dimly lit temples, incense smoke rising, the rhythmic chanting of priests. If you wanted a lover but not a baby, what choice did you have? You couldn't brew a pill or slip on a condom. Instead, you trusted in rituals, sometimes elaborate, sometimes desperate. Tablets inscribed in cuneiform record invocations to gods like Ishtar, asking for protection against pregnancy. Sometimes the requests are shockingly blunt. May she not conceive. Other times they're wrapped in metaphor, tying knots in string, meant to symbolically tie shut the womb. Even language became a form of contraception. Was it effective? Of course not. But effectiveness wasn't the point, it was about control. To believe you had even some agency over your fertility was itself a kind of power. And pause with me here, doesn't that sound familiar? Even today, how many of us wear charms, say small prayers, or carry rituals forward, half believing they'll shield us from life's chaos? The ancient world wasn't so different. Bitter herbs and secret knowledge. Of course, magic was only one part of the story. Ancient healers, often midwives, passed down another kind of knowledge, plants. The natural world was a pharmacy, and if you knew which leaves, seeds, or roots to gather, you could brew something that just might, stop a pregnancy from taking hold. One of the oldest records of herbal contraceptives comes from Mesopotamia and Egypt. Women consumed mixtures of juniper, acacia, or even pomegranate rind. Some of these had real biological effects. Acacia, when fermented, produces lactic acid, which can immobilize sperm. Think about that for a second. Thousands of years before microscopes, before germ theory, before chemistry, women were experimenting with acids, oils, and saps that genuinely altered fertility. How? Trial and error. Oral traditions whispered through generations. But here's the haunting part, the line between contraception and poison was razor thin. Pennyroyal, an herb later used in Greek and Roman medicine, could induce miscarriage but also cause fatal organ damage. When women took these brews, they weren't just risking fertility, they were risking their lives. Imagine the taste, bitter, acrid, the kind of drink that makes you shudder. Imagine drinking it with hope, knowing it might burn your stomach but save your future. Male responsibility, or the lack of it. Let's be honest. Most of these methods were born on women's bodies. Men in ancient Mesopotamia or Egypt rarely shouldered the responsibility for birth control. Yes, withdrawal. Coitus interruptus. was known and practiced, but socially the burden fell squarely on women. There are rare mentions of men wearing amulets or binding herbs to their genitals before sex. But overwhelmingly, women had to shoulder the risk, the pain, the rituals, the secrecy. And here's where our story takes on a timeless shape. Even in the earliest records, contraception was political. Who had power? Who had choice? Who bore the cost? We see the same struggles today, just dressed in modern clothing. Fertility as a double-edged sword. To understand the anxiety of the ancient world, we need to remember something. Children were both blessing and burden. In Mesopotamia, more children meant more workers for the farm, more sons to inherit, more daughters to marry into alliances. But too many, too fast, could break a family. Infant mortality was already high. Food supplies were fragile. A mother who birthed every year might not survive past 30. So ancient people lived in contradiction. Their myths celebrated fertility gods, their rituals begged for sons, and yet whispered in kitchens, in birthing huts, in the flicker of firelight were the prayers for respite. Contraception was always half in shadow, half in light. The first written recipes. The Ebers Papyrus from Egypt, 1550 BCE, is one of the oldest surviving medical texts, and reads like a strange cookbook for the body. Tucked among remedies for headaches and wounds are instructions for contraceptives. One recipe: grind dates, mix with honey and acacia, and insert as a pessary, a vaginal suppository. Another: crocodile dung mixed into a paste. Yes, crocodile dung. And here's where we have to pause, because historians still debate, was this serious medicine or satire? Did women actually use it, or was it a priest's joke? Some argue the dung's alkalinity could have created a hostile environment for sperm. Others think it was ritual magic disguised as medicine. Either way, the image is unforgettable, a woman crouching, applying this strange mixture in the hope of control. The smell, pungent and foul, filling the room. Desperation drives strange practices. Sex, shame, and silence. We might imagine ancient discussions of contraception as open and practical, but the truth is murkier. Fertility was bound up with honor, family, and morality. Talking about preventing children could be seen as taboo, even shameful. So much of this knowledge passed quietly from mother to daughter, from midwife to young bride. Written texts often reflect male perspectives, priests, physicians, philosophers, but the real keepers of contraceptive lore were women, whispering their recipes and rituals in secrecy. Doesn't it make you wonder? How much knowledge was lost because it was never written down, only spoken across firelight and gone with the wind? A universal desire. Here's the most striking realization. No matter where you look, Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, India, you find echoes of the same struggle. In India, texts describe herbal mixtures of long pepper, black pepper, and honey. In China, women consumed mercury-based brews, often lethal. In Greece, they sought silphium, a plant so valued it was stamped onto coins, until it was harvested to extinction. Different continents, different languages, different gods, but the same plea: let me decide when life begins inside me. It is one of the most ancient human desires, older than civilization itself. The drama beneath the surface. Let's return to our Mesopotamian woman at her shrine. Her husband may not know of her prayers, or the herb she hides in her cooking pot, or the amulet she wears tucked beneath her clothing. To him, sex is pleasure, maybe obligation. To her, it carries the shadow of death. She remembers the fever of childbirth, the child she buried, the exhaustion in her bones. And so she clings to any method, spell, potion, charm that offers even a sliver of hope. That tension, the desire for intimacy, the fear of its consequences, is the drama that shaped the earliest contraceptives. Seeds of a story that never ends. This first chapter of contraception's history sets the stage for everything that follows. Every strange recipe, every desperate ritual, every whispered instruction, they are all variations on a single theme: human beings trying to wrest control from nature. And if you feel a flicker of sympathy, a chill of recognition, you should. Because this is not some ancient alien story. It's our story. It's the same anxiety whispered through thousands of years. What if I'm not ready? What if I can't afford another mouth to feed? What if this child costs me my life? Those questions echo across time. They began here, in the clay houses of Mesopotamia, the temples of Egypt, the markets of India. And they continue today in apartments, dorm rooms, and homes around the world. Closing reflection. So, here in Chapter 1, we've seen that the history of contraception begins not with science, but with fear and with creativity. Amulets and herbs, rituals and prayers, bitter drinks and strange pastes, all born of the same urgency. As we move forward, we'll watch these practices grow stranger, sometimes more effective, sometimes cruel. We'll see plants vanish from the earth because they were too useful. We'll see condoms made from silk, then intestines, then rubber. We'll see women criminalized for selling knowledge, men mocked for wearing protection, and societies torn between morality and survival. But it all begins here, in the shadows of antiquity, with a woman whispering at a shrine, desperate for her womb to rest. And tell me, if you were her with nothing but clay, herbs, and hope, wouldn't you do the same? Chapter 2: Crocodile Dung and Honey, Egyptian Innovations. The Nile flows, steady and eternal, its banks green against the surrounding desert. Reeds whisper in the wind. Fishermen cast their nets while children splash in the shallows. And in the shadow of a mud brick house, a woman stirs a thick paste of dates, honey, and something less appetizing, something taken from the riverbank where crocodiles bask in the sun. The smell is sharp, earthy, rank. She wrinkles her nose but presses on. Tonight she will use it not as food, but as medicine. Not for healing, but for prevention. This is ancient Egypt, and she is preparing one of the world's oldest known contraceptives. Yes. Crocodile dung. And before you laugh or gag, let's take this seriously. Because what looks to us like bizarre superstition was, to the people of the Nile, an act of survival. Egypt, land of fertility and fear. Egyptian civilization revolved around fertility. The Nile flooded each year, spreading silt that brought crops to life. The gods themselves, Isis, Hathor, Min, were tied to birth, fertility, and the cycles of reproduction. But here's the paradox. In a culture that celebrated fertility, women were not passive vessels. They were active experimenters in managing it. Archaeologists and papyrus texts reveal that Egyptian women were remarkably pragmatic about contraception. They didn't just rely on prayers or charms, they mixed herbs, ground roots, inserted pessaries, and tried whatever might work. And when you live in a society where death in childbirth is common, and where feeding too many children could devastate a family, it makes sense that women would do whatever it took. Recipes from the papyrus. The Kahun Gynecological Papyrus, c. 1850 BCE is among the earliest surviving medical texts. Reading it is like peeking into a secret laboratory of the ancient world. 1. Instruction. Grind dates and acacia, mix with honey and insert into the vagina. Another. Use a paste of crocodile dung as a barrier. Now, at first glance, this sounds like superstition. But let's slow down and think scientifically. Honey has antibacterial properties and creates a thick, sticky medium that can block sperm. Acacia, when fermented, produces lactic acid, a natural spermicide. And crocodile dung? Strange as it seems, it's alkaline. Modern sperm prefer slightly alkaline environments, so in theory, altering the vaginal pH could disrupt conception. So were the Egyptians geniuses or just lucky? Probably both. Trial and error, over centuries, would have shown which mixtures seem to reduce pregnancies. And doesn't it make you wonder, which of today's folk remedies might one day be validated or debunked by science? The smell of desperation. Let's not romanticize it too much. Picture the reality: a woman crouched in the lamplight applying a paste of animal dung. The smell fills the room, sharp and sour. The texture clings, gritty against skin. This is not glamorous medicine. It is desperation made physical. And yet, in her world, this may be the difference between survival and ruin. Between another dangerous childbirth or a reprieve. Between hunger for her children or enough bread to last the season. When we look at ancient contraceptives, it's easy to laugh. But if you step closer, if you imagine the smell, the feel, the weight of fear behind each concoction, it stops being funny. It becomes human. Midwives, magic, and medicine. Who guided women in these practices? Not physicians. Usually they were men, more concerned with treating soldiers' wounds or recording diseases of kings. It was midwives and wise women who carried this knowledge. They straddled the line between healer and sorceress, prescribing herbs one moment and whispering incantations the next. In Egypt, medicine and magic weren't opposites. They were intertwined. A midwife might prepare a pessary of dates and acacia, then recite a protective spell to Isis while applying it. To her, the ritual was as important as the substance. Because even if the herbs failed, the spell gave hope. And hope is itself a medicine. The plant that changed everything, acacia, Of all the Egyptian contraceptives, acacia stands out. Ferment its gum, and you get lactic acid, the same compound found in some modern spermicides. This means that, quite by accident or brilliant observation, Egyptian women discovered one of the most biologically effective substances for preventing conception. Imagine chewing acacia pods, sticky and sweet, and realizing they affected your cycles. Imagine watching goats eat the plant, then noticing changes in their fertility. Little by little, patterns emerge, and women turn observation into practice. It's a reminder, women were scientists long before the word science existed. Sex, society, and secrecy. But just because women used these methods doesn't mean they talked about them openly. Egyptian art glorified motherhood. Tomb paintings show mothers nursing children, fertility goddesses protecting families. But the contraceptives, they're hidden in medical papyri, whispered in private. Why? Because society needed both sides of the coin. Publicly, fertility was celebrated. Privately, it was feared. And the women who walked that tightrope knew the cost of getting it wrong. Condoms before condoms. Here's a curious twist. Evidence suggests that Egyptians may have used sheaths, linen wrappings, or intestines as early forms of condoms. Some argue they were for disease prevention, others for ritual. But it's possible they were also a form of contraception. Imagine the rustle of linen, the awkward fumbling, and the flicker of oil lamps. Practical? Maybe not. Symbolic? Absolutely. The very act of creating a barrier shows awareness. Sex and pregnancy could be separated. That idea alone is revolutionary. Fertility and power. Contraception in Egypt wasn't just about families, it was about power. A woman who could control her fertility had more influence in her household. A concubine who could delay pregnancy could keep her position longer. Even in the royal court, the ability to space children could affect dynasties. Think of Cleopatra centuries later wielding her sexuality as a political tool. Behind her allure lay practical realities, how to manage the risks of reproduction. The glamour of history hides the grit of contraception. A global echo. Egypt wasn't alone. Around the same time in India, women used long pepper and black pepper mixed with honey. In China, they consumed quicksilver mercury, dangerous, yes, but believed to cool the womb. Across cultures, the theme is the same: natural materials, trial and error, a blend of medicine and magic. But Egypt's contribution stands out because their recipes were written down. They preserved the knowledge. They left us a record. And that record shows us how far people would go to take control. The crocodile as symbol. Why crocodile dung? Beyond its chemical properties, the crocodile itself was a potent symbol. To Egyptians, it was both sacred and terrifying. Sobek, the crocodile god, represented fertility and strength, but also chaos. Using crocodile dung wasn't just practical, it was symbolic, harnessing the animal's power to protect the womb. So when a woman inserted that pungent paste, she wasn't just applying medicine. She was invoking a god. She was making her body a battleground between fertility and restraint. The risk of silence. But here's the tragedy. Much of this knowledge didn't survive. The papyri we have are fragments. The oral traditions are lost. For every recipe we know, dozens vanished into the sands of time. And that makes you wonder, what if they had discovered something truly effective? What if a plant as powerful as modern contraceptives was once common, then forgotten? Silphium, the Greek plant we'll meet in the next chapter, nearly fits that description. Could Egypt have had its own? History is full of what-ifs. And contraception has more than most. Closing the scene. Picture her again, that Egyptian woman. She has finished her preparations. The paste is ready. Her husband lies nearby, unaware or maybe aware, but uninterested. She takes a breath, braces herself against the smell, and applies the mixture. Outside, the Nile flows on, eternal. Inside, in the small lamplit room, she has wrested a sliver of control over her fate. It may not work. It may even harm her. But in that moment, she has acted. She has refused to leave everything to the gods. She has declared that her body, at least for tonight, is her own. And isn't that the heart of the story of contraception? The refusal to surrender. The quiet rebellion against nature's demands. Chapter 3. The Greek Experiments. The sun hangs low over the Aegean Sea, the scent of olive groves drifting on the breeze. A philosopher in a white chiton walks along the stone colonnades of Athens, debating ethics, logic, and pregnancy. Yes, pregnancy. Because in classical Greece, even the greatest minds could not ignore one of humanity's oldest dilemmas: how to enjoy sex without its consequences. And if you think contraception is a modern obsession, let me take you back to a plant so famous it was stamped on coins, praised by poets, and harvested literally into extinction. Its name? Silphium. Silphium, the plant worth more than silver. Silphium was a tall, yellow-flowered plant that grew only in a narrow strip of land in Cyrene, a Greek colony in modern-day Libya. According to ancient texts, it was a wonder drug. It flavored food, cured coughs, treated fevers, and, most importantly, acted as a powerful contraceptive. Women chewed its leaves or drank extracts to prevent pregnancy. Some say a single dose after intercourse was enough. Imagine that, one plant so effective, so reliable, that it became the cornerstone of Greek reproductive control. But here's the catch. Silphium couldn't be cultivated. It grew wild, stubborn, and fragile. As demand exploded, exported across Greece, traded in Rome, praised in songs, the plant began to vanish. By the 1st century CE, Pliny the Elder lamented that only a single stalk remained, sent as a curiosity to Emperor Nero. Then it was gone. Extinct. Think about that for a moment. Humanity may have once had a natural contraceptive as effective as the pill, only to lose it forever. Isn't that chilling? Pennyroyal, the dangerous alternative. With silphium gone, women turned to other herbs. Chief among them, pennyroyal. Pennyroyal, part of the mint family, was brewed into teas or concentrated into oils. It could prevent pregnancy or induce miscarriage. But it carried a deadly risk: liver and organ failure. Even today, herbalists warn against its use. Picture it, a woman sipping a steaming cup of pennyroyal tea, the bitter aroma filling her nostrils, knowing each sip is a gamble. Relief from pregnancy or poisoning. This is the cruel reality of early contraception. The line between medicine and poison was paper thin. And women walked it every day. Aristotle and the logic of birth control. Now, let's step into the minds of philosophers. Aristotle, the great thinker, believed contraception had a place in society. He advised using preventive pessaries to block conception, favoring it over abortion, which he considered harsher. But Aristotle's reasoning wasn't feminist, it was political. He argued that families needed to limit children to avoid poverty, and that the state should regulate fertility to maintain balance. In other words, he saw contraception not as personal freedom, but as population control. And doesn't that sound eerily familiar? Even today, debates about contraception often blur the line between individual choice and state interest. From ancient Athens to modern legislatures, the struggle remains the same. Soranus of Ephesus, the Practical Guide. Not all Greek thinkers stayed in the clouds of philosophy. Soranus of Ephesus, a physician writing in the 12th century CE, gave us one of the most detailed manuals of contraception. His advice included vaginal suppositories made of wool soaked in oils or resins, drinking potions of pomegranate or copper salts. The classic method of withdrawal coitus interruptus. Soranus even described timing intercourse to avoid fertile days, an early form of what we now call the rhythm method. Imagine women listening to these instructions, weighing their options. Wool soaked in oil? A pungent potion of copper? Withdrawal with all its risks? Each method a compromise, each imperfect but each offering a glimmer of control. The philosophical debate, natural versus unnatural. Greeks debated endlessly. Was contraception unnatural? On one side, some argued that sex existed for reproduction, and interfering with that purpose was immoral. On the other, practical voices countered that pleasure was also a natural part of life, and controlling fertility was simply wisdom. These debates played out not just in philosophy but in daily life. Wealthy women, courtesans, and hetairai educated companions likely had greater access to contraceptives than poor women. Birth control was, even then, entangled with class and privilege. And here we ask, is controlling nature a violation, or is it the very definition of being human? The role of women, silent innovators. Greek texts often bear men's names: philosophers, physicians, poets. But behind the parchment, it was women who experimented, shared recipes, and bore the consequences. Imagine an Athenian wife whispering secrets to her neighbor over the market stalls. Imagine hetairai independent, educated courtesans passing on tips about silphium or pennyroyal to protect their livelihoods. These women weren't passive. They were scientists of survival. But their voices, largely unwritten, are the great silence in history. Contraception and power dynamics. Let's pause on hetairai for a moment. These women lived outside the constraints of traditional wives. They were educated, witty, sexual, and contraception gave them an edge. For a hetairai, avoiding pregnancy wasn't just personal, it was professional. Pregnancy could end her career, strip her independence. So knowledge of contraceptives wasn't just medical, it was economic power. Contrast that with a poor farmer's wife, with little access to exotic plants or expensive pessaries. For her, pregnancy was relentless, inescapable. Already, the story of contraception is a story of inequality. The tragedy of silphium's extinction. We have to return to silphium because its loss is more than botanical trivia. It's a metaphor for history itself. Here was a plant so valuable that it was guarded, traded, and worshipped. Its image stamped on coins shows how central it was to life. And yet, greed and overuse destroyed it. It's hard not to draw a modern parallel. How many resources today, forests, medicines, ecosystems, are being driven to extinction by overconsumption? What knowledge, what cures, what powers might we lose forever? Silphium's absence haunts the history of contraception. It whispers of a world where women might have had reliable control centuries earlier if only the plant had survived. The sound of the symposium. Let's close with a scene. A symposium in Athens, men reclining on couches, drinking wine, debating philosophy. A poet recites verses praising love. A courtesan pours another cup, smiling coyly, but in her mind she calculates, when will her next period come? Should she chew a sprig of silphium? Should she sip pennyroyal tea? The men argue abstract theories of natural law. The women live its consequences. The laughter, the music, the clinking of cups all float over a quiet undercurrent of anxiety. That tension, the gap between pleasure and consequence, defined Greek society as much as its temples and tragedies. Closing reflection. Greek contraception shows us a world balanced between brilliance and brutality. They discovered plants that worked, only to lose them forever. They debated philosophy but left women to drink poisons. They recorded recipes, but only through the voices of men. And yet they took a step forward. They moved beyond magic and charms into something resembling science. They asked questions, tested theories, observed nature. They set the stage for the Romans, who would carry their methods into a new empire. But before we leave Greece, let's sit with this thought. Somewhere in the dry hills of Cyrene, silphium once bloomed, tall, fragrant, golden. Women plucked its stalks, brewed its extracts, and shaped their futures with it. And now, it's gone. Tell me, what would you give to bring it back? Chapter 4. Rome's Pragmatism and Excess. The streets of Rome are alive. Vendors cry out in the forum, smoke curls from braziers roasting meat, and the clatter of sandals echoes on stone. Rome is empire, order, and chaos entwined. Here, pleasure and pragmatism were not contradictions. They were the lifeblood of daily life. And when it came to sex, the Romans were frank. Brutally frank. They celebrated it in mosaics, painted it on brothel walls, joked about it in taverns. They were not squeamish. And yet, beneath the laughter and bravado, they faced the same timeless dilemma: how to enjoy desire without drowning in children. The Roman mindset, practical above all. Unlike the Greeks, who wrapped contraception in philosophy, Romans were more straightforward. If something worked, they used it. If it didn't, they discarded it. They borrowed from Greek knowledge, improved upon Egyptian recipes, and mixed medicine with superstition in equal measure. Cyrannus of Ephesus, the Greek physician we met in the last chapter, actually worked in Rome during the 12th century CR. His writings, preserved in the Gynecology, became a cornerstone of Roman contraceptive practice. His recommendations? Wool tampons soaked in oils and resins. Vaginal suppositories of honey, pomegranate, or copper salts. And of course, withdrawal, the oldest method of all. For the Romans, contraception wasn't shameful, it was practical. Soldiers wanted mistresses without heirs. Wives wanted spacing between children. Prostitutes wanted to protect their livelihoods. The empire needed order, not chaos. And birth control, in its patchwork way, was part of that order. Wool and oils, the Roman pessary. Let's picture this in detail. A woman sits in a small chamber lit by oil lamps. A midwife hands her a soft ball of wool, soaked in a pungent mixture of oil and resin. She inserts it gently, hoping it will block conception. Wool was cheap, available, and absorbent. Oils, olive, cedar, or pomegranate seed were thought to immobilize or kill sperm. Combined, they created one of the earliest barrier methods. Imagine the texture, rough but pliant. The smell, sharp, medicinal. The hope that this simple piece of wool might hold back fate. Herbs, potions, and poison. Like the Greeks, Romans also relied on herbs. Pennyroyal remained popular, as did rue and Queen Anne's lace. Women brewed teas, tinctures, or pessaries with these plants. But again, the risks were high. Too much pennyroyal and the liver fails. Too much rue and convulsions follow. Roman women walked the same thin line between medicine and poison. We even find evidence in Roman cookbooks, yes, cookbooks of recipes laced with contraceptive herbs. Imagine seasoning your dinner not just for flavor but for fertility control. A secret hidden in the stew. Sex as commerce, the brothel test. To understand Roman contraception, we must step into a brothel. The air is thick with wine and sweat. Murals of explicit scenes decorate the walls. Prostitutes laugh, flirt, negotiate. Here, contraception wasn't a luxury, it was survival. Prostitutes likely used wool plugs, herbal douches, or pessaries daily. Some may have experimented with primitive condoms, linen sheaths, or animal bladders. Disease prevention mattered too, with syphilis not yet rampant but other venereal infections already present. In these brothels, contraception became industrial, routine. A hidden technology sustaining one of Rome's oldest trades. The double standard. Here's where Roman pragmatism collides with Roman hypocrisy. Men could father dozens of children out of wedlock and face little consequence. Women bore the burden of pregnancy, the risks of childbirth, the stigma of illegitimacy. So contraception was largely a woman's responsibility. The wool, the potions, the herbs, these were tools passed down among women, midwives, and courtesans. Male physicians like Cyrannus recorded them, but the practice? That was women's work. And yet, elite men still had opinions. Some moralists condemned contraception as unnatural, a threat to Rome's growth. Others endorsed it as practical family planning. The debate was as divided then as it is now. Abortion in the shadows. Romans also knew abortion, though it was dangerous and controversial. Herbal abortifacients like pennyroyal or rue were common. Surgical methods existed but were life-threatening. Writers mention it with a mix of fascination and horror. Ovid, the poet of love, laments a mistress who aborted his child. Seneca, the philosopher, condemns it as against nature. But in practice, many women turned to it when contraception failed. This underscores a brutal truth. When contraception was unreliable, women risked their lives to avoid motherhood. Sex, power, and the Roman household. In wealthy Roman households, contraception carried political weight. An elite woman, married for alliance, might want to delay children until her position was secure. A concubine might use contraceptives to avoid being cast aside. A slave woman might have them forced upon her by masters seeking to control her fertility. Power shaped the womb. And contraception was not just private, it was political. The sound of the baths. Let's shift scenes. The public baths of Rome, steam rising, water sloshing, laughter echoing. Women gather in the women's section, gossiping, sharing secrets. Among the whispers, recipes, advice, warnings. Wool with pomegranate oil works best. Rue tea's dangerous, my cousin nearly died. Withdrawal. don't trust men to do it properly. This is how knowledge spread not in libraries, but in steam-filled chambers between women who had everything to lose and everything to gain. Pragmatism and excess. Rome was a paradox. On one hand, it valued order, family, inheritance. On the other, it reveled in pleasure, indulgence, and excess. Contraception sat right in the middle of this tension. It allowed pleasure without chaos, indulgence without consequence. It was the invisible gear that kept Roman society spinning. And yet, it was imperfect. Methods failed. Herbs poisoned. Wool shifted. Withdrawal relied on trust. Every act of contraception was a gamble. But Romans were gamblers by nature. And so they rolled the dice, night after night, century after century. A glimpse through the keyhole. Imagine peering into a Roman bedroom. A wealthy senator reclines, his lover beside him. On the table sits a small dish of oil, a ball of wool, a sprig of rue. He laughs, pours wine, recites a poem. She smiles, but her mind is elsewhere, calculating, preparing, protecting. This is the unseen labor of Roman women. The hidden rituals that shape the empire's future, one womb at a time. Rome teaches us that contraception is not just medical, it is cultural. The Romans didn't treat it as abstract philosophy or divine taboo. They treated it as life, as necessity, as part of the machinery of empire. Wool, oils, herbs, withdrawal, crude, imperfect, dangerous. But each method represented a step forward, a refusal to surrender control. And here's the thought to carry with us: Rome fell, but the questions it wrestled with did not. How do we balance pleasure and responsibility? How do we protect women's bodies in societies built on inequality? How do we prevent desire from destroying lives? The Romans never found perfect answers. Neither have we. But their attempts echo still in our medicines, our debates, our fears. So as we leave Rome behind, let's remember the wool, the oils, the whispers, and the baths. The empire may be dust, but the struggle is eternal. Chapter 5: Shadows of the Middle Ages. A bell tolls across a foggy village. The year is 1250. The air smells of wood smoke and wet earth. Inside a small stone church, a priest raises his voice, warning of the dangers of lust, of sin, of spilling seed where it was not meant to fall. Men bow their heads. Women clutch rosaries. But when the sermon ends, when the villagers return to their cottages, the quiet negotiations of sex continue. And so do the whispered secrets of contraception. The Middle Ages, often imagined as a time of rigid faith and silence, were, in truth, a patchwork of contradictions. The church thundered against birth control, but in kitchens, fields, and birthing rooms, women still shared recipes, remedies, and advice. Desire did not vanish. Fear of pregnancy did not fade. And the methods, however crude, continued. The church's war on control. For Christianity, fertility was sacred. Children were gifts from God. To deliberately prevent pregnancy was to defy divine will. St. Augustine railed against those who used perverse methods to enjoy sex without procreation. The sin was not just lust, but the deliberate denial of life. Medieval canon law codified this. Withdrawal, potions, even herbal knowledge were condemned as sinful, sometimes punishable as witchcraft. But human nature doesn't bow so easily to decrees. And if the priest thundered on Sunday, the midwife whispered on Monday. The dominance of withdrawal. In this period, withdrawal coitus interruptus became the most common form of contraception. Imagine a couple by firelight, the husband promising restraint, the wife silently calculating trust. The margin of error? Enormous. The reliance on self-control? Questionable. Yet it was widespread. Cheap, immediate, invisible. The church condemned it as a mortal sin. But in practice, many couples used it anyway. Sin weighed less heavily than hunger, fear, or survival. The midwife's secrets. If withdrawal was unreliable, women turned again to herbs. Midwives, the guardians of women's health, kept knowledge alive, passing it quietly from hand to hand. Some common remedies. Rue, bitter and strong, used to prevent conception or induce miscarriage. Queen Anne's lace, wild carrot seeds, chewed as a postcoital contraceptive. Juniper berries, brewed into teas. Hellebore, poisonous but sometimes used in desperation. Picture a midwife's hut, bundles of dried herbs hanging from rafters, the sharp smell of roots and resin in the air. A young woman enters, nervous, whispering her request. The midwife brews a bitter tea, presses it into her hands, and mutters both instructions and prayers. Science and sorcery woven together. Witches and persecution. But here lies the danger. As the church tightened its grip, women with too much herbal knowledge drew suspicion. A midwife with recipes to close the womb could easily be branded a witch. During witch hunts, accusations often centered on women's control over fertility, claims that witches tied knots in men's bodies or brewed potions to prevent conception. These were not random fears, they were rooted in the very real practices of contraception. To control reproduction was to wield power. And in a patriarchal society, that was terrifying. Sex in monasteries and courts. Not all contraceptive use happened in cottages. Behind monastery walls, priests and monks, bound by celibacy, sometimes broke their vows, relying on withdrawal or herbal potions to conceal their sins. Court records reveal scandals of nuns secretly pregnant, abortions arranged, herbal concoctions smuggled into cloisters. And in noble courts, where lineage and inheritance were everything, contraception carried political weight. An heir could make or break dynasties. Mistresses of kings and nobles often relied on secret methods to protect themselves or were forced to surrender to dangerous abortions when pregnancies threatened political stability. Silence in the records. One of the strangest things about the Middle Ages is how little is written about contraception openly. Medical texts survive, but often coded, vague, or written in Latin beyond the reach of common folk. The real knowledge lived orally. Whispers by the hearth. Recipes scratched in the margins of almanacs. Advice exchanged in markets. This silence makes the history ghostly. We know contraception existed. We see glimpses in trials, sermons, and condemnations. But the voices of women, those who actually use the methods, are nearly invisible. Doesn't that make you wonder how much was lost? The smell of the kitchen, the weight of fear. Picture a peasant woman in 14th century France. She has 4 children already, the youngest still clinging to her skirts. Her husband earns little. Food is scarce. Another child could mean starvation. In her kitchen, she grinds seeds of Queen Anne's lace, stirs them into ale, and drinks. The taste is earthy, bitter, strange. She doesn't know the science that the seeds can disrupt progesterone levels, interfering with implantation. She only knows what her mother told her: drink this and you might be spared. She prays it works. She prays the priest never learns. The Church's contradictions. It's tempting to think the Church was monolithic, but in practice, attitudes varied. Some priests turned a blind eye, understanding the desperation of their flock. Others thundered with hellfire. At the same time, monasteries copied ancient texts, including Greek and Roman medical manuals that contained contraceptive recipes. Knowledge was preserved, even as it was condemned. The hypocrisy is almost comic, priests banning what their own libraries protected. Pleasure in the shadows. Despite official condemnation, medieval people were not sexless. Far from it. Songs, poems, and bawdy tales celebrate desire. The Decameron by Boccaccio, written during the plague years, is filled with erotic mischief. Even Chaucer's Canterbury Tales hint at sexual wit. Behind the laughter lay reality. Pleasure carried risk. And contraception, however unreliable, softened the edge of that risk. The Witch Trial Testimony. Let's step into a courtroom. A woman stands accused. Her neighbors testify. She gave me a potion, and I did not conceive. The judge nods gravely. To him, this is proof of witchcraft. To the woman, it was survival. In trial records, again and again, we see references to potions, teas, and knots. They are framed as diabolical acts. But strip away the fear and they are contraceptive practices. This is the dark irony of the Middle Ages. To help women control their fertility was to risk your life. Closing the candlelit scene. A cottage. A fire. A woman sipping bitter tea, eyes closed, praying for relief. A priest thundering in the pulpit about sin. A midwife hiding her knowledge in whispers. A noblewoman bribing her servants for herbs. A monk sneaking into a lover's bed, clutching secrets. The Middle Ages were not silent. They were tense, shadowed, filled with contradiction. Publicly, fertility was sacred. Privately, it was feared. And in the gap between, contraception survived not openly, not safely, but stubbornly. Closing reflection. The Middle Ages remind us of a crucial truth: contraception has always been political. It is not just medicine or magic, it is power. Power for women to control their lives. Power that institutions feared, condemned, and punished. And yet, despite the threat of damnation, despite the risk of execution, the knowledge persisted. Passed hand to hand, hidden in kitchens, whispered in markets. Contraception did not vanish in the shadow of the church. It survived. Quiet, fragile, dangerous, but alive. As we step forward into the Renaissance, that survival will blossom again, fed by trade, exploration, and the collision of cultures. New materials, silk, sponges, exotic herbs will emerge. The shadows will not lift, but the practices will grow bolder. And so the story continues, candle to candle, whisper to whisper. Chapter 6. Silk, Sponges, and Secrecy in the Renaissance. The Renaissance, a time of discovery, art, and rebirth. Cities like Florence, Venice, and Paris hummed with trade, music, and whispers of revolution. Painters raised their brushes to the glory of the human form. Scientists dissected bodies to uncover their hidden truths. Merchants carried silks, spices, and secrets from distant lands. And among these secrets, tucked between rolls of fabric and vials of exotic powders, came new ways of managing the oldest human dilemma: the fear of unwanted life. The Middle Ages had shrouded contraception in shadows. The Renaissance pulled it cautiously into lamplight. The Venetian brothel, a theater of innovation. Let's step into Venice. The year is 1520. Gondolas glide silently along the canals, the water rippling with reflections of lanterns. Behind the closed shutters of a brothel, the air is warm with incense, laughter, and music. Women lounge in silken robes, pouring wine for wealthy merchants. Here, contraception wasn't optional, it was survival. Pregnancy could ruin a courtesan, strip her of income, even end her career. And so, innovation flourished in these spaces. Merchants brought silk from China, lamb intestines from butchers, sponges from the Mediterranean. Courtesans and brothel owners experimented with them, crafting early condoms, inserting sponges soaked in vinegar or lemon juice, cutting fine fabrics into sheaths. The brothel was not only a marketplace of pleasure, it was a laboratory of contraception. The birth of the condom. It is here, in the Renaissance, that the condom truly emerges. Descriptions from the 16th century tell us of sheaths made of linen, tied with ribbons, washed and reused. Others were made of animal bladders or intestines, soaked in water to soften them. They were awkward, expensive, and not always effective, but revolutionary. Why? Because they were not just contraceptives. They were shields. Europe was reeling under the spread of syphilis, a terrifying new disease that disfigured faces, rotted flesh, and killed slowly. Condoms, crude as they were, offered hope of protection. Thus, for the first time in history, contraception and disease prevention intertwined. Silk and the whispered luxury. For the wealthy, silk became a material of choice. Imagine the rustle of fabric, smooth and delicate, cut and stitched into a sheath. It was costly, delicate, and often scented with oils or herbs. Condoms of silk were less about practicality than prestige. To use one was to flaunt wealth and sophistication. They were as much symbols of status as jewels or fine clothing. And yet their very existence revealed something radical. People were openly crafting barriers between sex and conception. A quiet rebellion against the inevitability of life. The sponge, an ancient tool renewed. The Renaissance also revived the use of the vaginal sponge. Sea sponges, cut small, were soaked in vinegar, lemon juice, or brandy, then inserted before intercourse. The acidity was thought to immobilize sperm. Picture a woman, candlelight flickering on the walls, carefully preparing a sponge. The smell of vinegar stings her nose. She tucks it discreetly into place, smoothing her gown, masking her fear with a practiced smile. The sponge was cheap, accessible, and at least sometimes effective. It would endure in various forms for centuries. Recipes written in code. Of course, not all contraceptives were physical devices. Herbal remedies persisted, often written in coded recipes to avoid church censure. An apothecary's book might list herbs for cooling the womb, or plants to still the seed. These were euphemisms for contraceptives or abortifacients. The language was careful, guarded. Too explicit, and you risked charges of obscenity or worse, witchcraft. This was the Renaissance paradox. Knowledge blossomed, but secrecy remained. Casanova and the condom. Fast forward to the 18th century, and we meet Giacomo Casanova, the Venetian adventurer and lover. His memoirs detail his use of assurance devices. Early condoms of linen tied with ribbons, washed and reused. He joked about testing them by inflating them like balloons before use. Casanova treated condoms as tools of seduction, props in his erotic theater. But beneath the bravado lay pragmatism. He wanted pleasure without airs, intimacy without consequence. In his flamboyant way, he embodies the Renaissance spirit, indulgent, curious, inventive. Sex, sin, and secrecy. Despite these innovations, the Church still condemned contraception. Condoms were labeled sinful, a betrayal of nature. Herbal recipes were whispered, hidden, or encoded. Midwives still faced suspicion, their knowledge of fertility sometimes branding them witches. But the tide was shifting. Trade, exploration, and wealth were changing Europe. Knowledge crossed borders, smuggled in merchant ships and medical treatises. The Renaissance mind, curious, skeptical, ambitious, was less willing to let morality silence desire. The merchant's satchel. Imagine a traveling merchant, his satchel filled with silks, spices, perfumes, and a few carefully folded linen sheaths. He sells them quietly, discreetly, in brothels or noble courts. They are expensive, but to the right buyer, priceless. He knows the risks. The Church condemns. The law could punish. But demand is strong, and profit stronger. The condom becomes contraband, traded alongside cinnamon and saffron, a hidden luxury of the Renaissance marketplace. The role of women. And yet, as always, women bore the greater burden. Courtesans experimented with sponges, wives with herbal teas, midwives with pessaries. Men might wear sheaths, but it was women who lived with the consequences of failure. Still, the Renaissance opened small cracks of autonomy. Women with wealth or connections could access imported materials, discreet recipes, coded advice. For poor women, options were harsher, riskier, but the knowledge persisted. The sound of a court masquerade. Let's end this chapter in a palace ballroom. Masks glitter, music swells, silk gowns sweep across polished floors. Behind the masks, flirtations spark touches, whispers, promises. A nobleman slips away with his mistress. In a chamber lit by candles, she reaches for a sponge soaked in vinegar. He produces a linen sheath tied with ribbon. They laugh, kiss, embrace. The masquerade continues, even here. Pleasure and risk, love and calculation twined together. This is the Renaissance, a world of masks, secrets, experiments. A world where sex was art, but also survival. Closing reflection. The Renaissance marks a turning point. From wool and herbs, contraception moved towards silk and sponges, condoms and codes. Trade and science expanded possibilities, even as morality tried to restrain them. It was imperfect, clumsy, often dangerous. But it was progress. And beneath the perfumes, silks, and laughter of the age, contraception whispered its quiet rebellion. As we move into the Enlightenment, those whispers will grow louder. Manuals will circulate, ideas will spread, and contraception will begin its long march into public debate. For now, remember the silk sheath, the vinegar sponge, the coded recipe. They are the ancestors of modern devices. Fragile, imperfect, secretive but vital. Chapter 7. Enlightenment and Enlightened Desires. The 18th century, the world was buzzing with change. Printing presses clattered, philosophers filled salons with talk of liberty and reason, and revolutions sparked in America and France. Science challenged superstition, astronomy measured the heavens, and medicine, still fumbling, began to grope toward modernity. And yet, amid the lofty ideals of freedom and progress, the age was also dripping with wine, perfume, and powdered wigs. Behind velvet curtains, in candlelit chambers, men and women pursued pleasure with unashamed vigor. The Enlightenment wasn't just about philosophy. It was about desire. And with desire came the same old problem: how to enjoy without consequence. Condoms in the Age of Reason. By the 1700s, condoms had spread across Europe. They were still crude, made of linen, leather, or animal intestines, but they were becoming common enough to attract moral outrage. In London, condom sellers advertised in secret, selling French letters or assurance sheaths in taverns and markets. They were washed, reused, sometimes scented with perfumes or soaked in medicinal solutions. Some came stitched with ribbons, a curious mix of practicality and elegance. But their popularity wasn't just about preventing children. By now, syphilis had ravaged Europe for over 2 centuries. Faces pocked, noses collapsed, bodies wasted. Condoms promised not just birth control, but survival. Imagine a gentleman in a powdered wig, slipping a delicate sheath from a velvet pouch, tying it with ribbon, the faint smell of vinegar rising from its surface. Awkward, perhaps, but better than death. Casanovas. Assurance devices. Enter Giacomo Casanova, the Venetian adventurer, gambler, and lover, whose very name became a byword for seduction. His memoirs are a carnival of escapades, duels, and conquests. And woven throughout are references to condoms. Casanova called them assurance devices. He wrote of inflating them like balloons to test for holes. He joked about their failure. He carried them with him, washed and reused them, and boasted of their reliability. What's striking is not just his use, but his candor. Casanova was no moralist. He was pragmatic. He wanted pleasure without airs, seduction without scandal. In his flamboyant way, he represented a new age, one where contraceptives were discussed not just in shadows, but in print. Public health and private desire. The Enlightenment's fascination with reason extended to health. Pamphlets began circulating warning of syphilis and touting condoms as protection. Doctors debated their effectiveness. Authorities worried about declining birth rates, while individuals worried about their own bodies. For the first time, contraception entered public health discourse. It was no longer just a private matter of women and midwives. It was a civic question: how do we balance pleasure, disease, and population? Doesn't that sound eerily modern? Secret manuals and coded knowledge. Alongside condoms, herbal contraceptives persisted. But in the age of print, new forms of dissemination appeared: secret manuals, disguised as medical texts or philosophical treatises, circulated among the curious. One infamous book, Charles Knowlton's Fruits of Philosophy, first published in 1832 but rooted in Enlightenment-era ideas. It openly described methods of birth control, sparking outrage, arrests, and trials. Earlier pamphlets, less direct, used euphemisms, means of preventing the increase of family, or methods for regulating health. Readers knew the code. Behind polite words hid contraceptive recipes, withdrawal techniques, and condom advertisements. Knowledge was still dangerous, but it was spreading. The double standard of morality. Of course, the Enlightenment was not free of hypocrisy. Men openly joked about condoms in taverns. Prostitutes used them daily. Courtesans and mistresses whispered of herbal teas and sponges. But respectable wives? They were expected to bear children, to uphold virtue. Their contraceptive use was hidden, often discouraged, sometimes impossible. The divide was clear. The elite and the free-spirited experimented. The poor and the dutiful bore the burden. The sound of the salon. Let's pause in a Parisian salon. The year is 1760. Chandeliers glitter. The air hums with talk of Rousseau, Voltaire, liberty, and reason. A countess, laughing behind her fan, leans close to her companion. Their flirtation is obvious. Later, as the salon empties, she slips into a carriage with him. In her chamber, she reaches for a sponge soaked in lemon juice. He produces a fine sheath of linen tied with ribbon. Their laughter softens into whispers, then into silence. Liberty, equality, fraternity, and contraception. All part of the Enlightenment spirit. Brothels, pleasure, and pragmatism. As in the Renaissance, brothels remained hubs of contraceptive practice. Prostitutes relied on condoms, sponges, and herbal rinses. Brothel owners often supplied these materials, protecting both workers and clients. Sex was commerce, and contraception was the infrastructure. It wasn't romantic, it was economic survival. The Enlightenment's brothels were also laboratories, refining condoms, testing herbal solutions, and inserting knowledge. In their own way, they were part of the age's scientific experimentation. Science creeps forward. Scientists of the 18th century began studying reproduction more closely. Sperm were discovered under microscopes in 1677, but their role in conception wasn't fully understood until later. Still, the idea that sex involved seed and ovum gave new credence to barrier methods. Theories flourished, sometimes absurd, sometimes insightful. Some doctors recommended post-coital douching with vinegar or wine. Others suggested mechanical devices to block semen. Crude, yes, but edging closer to biology. For the first time, contraception was not just magic, not just folk wisdom, it was edging into science. The smell of vinegar, the whisper of silk. Imagine again the sensory details of Enlightenment contraception. The sharp sting of vinegar on a sponge. The smooth slide of silk tied delicately with ribbon. The bitter taste of pennyroyal tea sipped cautiously in candlelight. The rustle of pamphlets, pages turned quickly, eyes scanning for secrets. Pleasure in this age was not simple indulgence. It was layered with calculation, caution, and invention. Revolution, freedom, and the womb. As revolution swept Europe and America, ideas of liberty expanded. People demanded freedom from kings, from tyrants, from poverty. And quietly, women sought freedom from relentless pregnancies. Contraception was not part of political manifestos. But in practice, it was part of the broader movement of autonomy. To control one's body was, in its own way, a revolutionary act. Closing the scene. The Enlightenment gave us more than philosophy and revolutions. It gave us the condom as we recognize it today, awkward, imperfect, but recognizable. It gave us pamphlets and manuals, spreading contraceptive knowledge in coded words. It gave us Casanova, flaunting his sheaths with playful bravado. It also gave us contradictions, liberty for some, silence for others. Advancement, but not equality. Knowledge, but still hidden. The age of reason shone bright, but contraception remained a candlelit secret tucked into satchels, whispered in salons, hidden in kitchens. Closing reflection. The Enlightenment reminds us that progress is never straightforward. Condoms improved, science advanced, knowledge spread, but stigma remained, hypocrisy thrived, and inequality persisted. And yet something had shifted. For the first time, contraception was not just survival. It was choice, commerce, and even fashion. It had entered the public imagination. As we step into the Victorian age, that imagination will collide with prudishness, morality, and scandal. Condoms will become mass-produced. Manuals will be banned. Women will face new battles for knowledge. But the seeds of modern birth control, silk sheaths, vinegar sponges, secret pamphlets were planted here in the age of reason and desire. Chapter 8: Victorian Hypocrisy. A fog rolls over London. Gas lamps flicker. Carriages rattle across cobblestones. Behind lace curtains, women sew, men read newspapers, and the entire city pretends to live by a code of moral purity. The Victorian era, a time of stiff collars, strict etiquette, and sermons on virtue. But step closer, lift the curtain, and another world reveals itself. A world of secret pamphlets, coded advertisements, and hidden drawers filled with devices. The Victorians, for all their prudish posturing, were obsessed with sex and just as obsessed with avoiding its consequences. The age of contradiction. Publicly, the Victorians proclaimed that sex existed only within marriage, only for procreation. Respectable women were meant to be modest, pure, almost asexual. Men were warned against vice, lust, and indulgence. Privately, London teemed with brothels. Pornography flourished underground. Aristocrats kept mistresses. Middle-class couples quietly experimented with contraceptives. The same society that railed against immorality also fueled an expanding contraceptive market. This is the hypocrisy at the heart of the age, morality on the lips, desire in the shadows. The rise of devices. The 19th century saw rapid advances in manufacturing, and contraception rode the wave. Condoms. With vulcanized rubber patented by Charles Goodyear in 1844, condoms became more durable, affordable, and widely available. No more fragile linen or smelly intestines. Rubber sheaths could be mass-produced, washed, reused, and sold discreetly. Diaphragms and cervical caps. Introduced in the mid-1800s, these devices gave women a barrier method they could control themselves. Inserted before sex, they blocked sperm at the cervix. Sponges, still in use, often soaked in vinegar or quinine. They were cheap, discreet, and easy to conceal. Imagine opening a drawer in a Victorian household. Among the hairpins, gloves, and perfumes lies a folded rubber sheath, faintly smelling of sulfur. A sponge tucked in a pouch. A small cap of rubber or metal hidden beneath fabric. These were not just objects, they were quiet rebellions against destiny. Charles Knowlton's Fruits of Philosophy. If one book lit the match of controversy, it was Charles Knowlton's Fruits of Philosophy, 1832. An American physician, Knowlton wrote candidly about contraception, describing withdrawal, condoms, and sponges. His goal? To spread practical knowledge and reduce unwanted pregnancies. the book scandalized authorities. In England, when reformers Annie Besant and Charles Bradlaugh republished it in 1877, they were arrested for obscenity. The trial became a national sensation. But here's the twist: the prosecution only made the book more popular. Tens of thousands of copies were sold. Suddenly, contraception was not just whispered in kitchens, it was debated in newspapers, preached against in pulpits, and discussed across dinner tables. The Comstock Laws. Meanwhile, in America, Anthony Comstock, a moral crusader, waged war on contraceptives. The Comstock Laws of 1873 banned the distribution of obscene materials, which included not only pornography but also contraceptive devices and even medical information about birth control. Think about that. In the eyes of the law, a pamphlet explaining diaphragms was as obscene as explicit pornography. Women could be denied knowledge that might save their lives, while men empowered to find morality on their behalf. And yet, the laws could not stop demand. Contraceptives continued to circulate through coded advertisements and underground networks. Hypocrisy thickened like the London fog. The language of euphemism. In Victorian newspapers, one finds curious ads. Remedies for irregular health. Married ladies' comforts. Articles of French manufacture for gentlemen. Everyone knew what these meant. Euphemism was the currency of the age. Condoms were preventives. Sponges were feminine hygiene aids. Books on contraception were marriage guides. The language danced around the truth, creating a culture where everyone knew and no one admitted. Brothels and rubber. London alone had thousands of brothels, ranging from elegant houses of courtesans to grim alleys of poverty. Prostitutes were among the biggest users of condoms and sponges, supplied often by brothel owners. Rubber sheaths became as much a tool of their trade as perfume or silk stockings. Yet even in these spaces, the hypocrisy loomed. Authorities railed against prostitution while quietly visiting brothels themselves. Public health officials condemned venereal disease while restricting access to the very devices that could help prevent it. Middle-class couples. But contraception was not confined to brothels. Respectable married couples also sought to limit family size. The Industrial Revolution made large families less practical. Urban life was expensive. Middle-class couples quietly used withdrawal condoms and diaphragms to plan their families. Imagine a wife in a Victorian townhouse, 4 children already in her care, dreading another pregnancy. She persuades her husband to use a sheath, or she consults a discreet doctor for a diaphragm. The decision is never spoken aloud in polite society, but it reshapes her life. Pornography and knowledge. One of the strangest paradoxes of the Victorian age is the explosion of pornography. Erotic books, prints, and photographs circulated widely, often featuring condoms or contraceptive references. At the same time, educational manuals on birth control were suppressed. So explicit images of sex were easier to obtain than practical contraceptive advice. Isn't that a contradiction we still see today? The smell of sulfur and the whisper of fear. Contraceptives of the 19th century had their sensory world. The faint sulfur scent of rubber condoms. The acidic tang of vinegar-soaked sponges. The rustle of pamphlet pages hidden under mattresses. The anxious whispers of women asking midwives for advice, fearful of discovery. Each object carried not just a physical presence but a weight of secrecy, fear, and quiet hope. The silent rebellion. In the end, Victorian contraception was a rebellion wrapped in lace. Respectable society condemned it. The law tried to ban it. The church railed against it. But in the privacy of bedrooms, in the secrecy of brothels, in the whispers of women's circles, it thrived. Condoms, diaphragms, sponges, and coded books spread quietly, reshaping lives one household at a time. The hypocrisy is glaring, an age obsessed with purity, yet consumed by desire, an era that banned knowledge, yet devoured pornography, a society that condemned women for immorality, yet left them to bear the burden of childbirth alone. Closing reflection. The Victorian age teaches us that repression does not kill desire, it multiplies secrecy. Behind the stiff collars and corsets, men and women experimented with contraceptives just as eagerly as any age before. They had more tools than their ancestors: rubber, diaphragms, pamphlets, but also more condemnation. And yet, the knowledge survived. Hidden, fragile, coded, but alive. As we move into the 20th century, the whispers will grow into shouts. Activists like Margaret Sanger will defy the law. Birth control clinics will open. The pill will arrive, shaking the world. But it all builds on the quiet rebellions of Victorians, sitting in gaslit bedrooms, fumbling with rubber sheaths, whispering over pamphlets, daring to dream of lives they could control. Chapter 9. The 20th Century Revolution begins. The dawn of the 20th century. Cities buzz with electricity. Streetcars rattle. Jazz spills from smoky bars. Women in corsets begin to loosen them, inch by inch, demanding suffrage, education, and something even more dangerous: control over their own bodies. For thousands of years, contraception had been whispered, hidden, condemned. But in this new century, the whispers grew louder. Women no longer wanted secrecy. They wanted rights. And birth control would become one of the fiercest battlegrounds of modern history. Margaret Sanger and the cry for freedom. In 1914, an American nurse named Margaret Sanger wrote 3 words that shook the world: birth control. She had seen too much women collapsing from repeated pregnancies, mothers dying in childbirth, families crushed by poverty. She believed that women could never be free until they had the power to decide if and when to have children. So she began writing pamphlets, lecturing, opening clinics. She defied the Comstock laws that banned contraceptive information as obscene. She was arrested, harassed, condemned. But she refused to stop. In 1916, she opened the first birth control clinic in Brooklyn. Police raided it. She opened another. And another. Each raid only spread her message further. Her vision was simple but radical: contraception not as secrecy, but as justice. Rubber goes mainstream. Meanwhile, technology marched on. Vulcanized rubber, perfected in the 19th century, made condoms cheaper and sturdier. By the 1920s, condoms were mass-produced, sold under brand names like Trojan and Ramses. Imagine the packaging: bold lettering, masculine imagery, promises of protection. They were marketed not just as contraceptives, but as shields against venereal disease, a framing that made them more socially acceptable. Brothels used them. Soldiers carried them. Couples tucked them discreetly into drawers. For the first time in history, contraception was becoming normalized, even commercialized. The shadow of eugenics. But the early birth control movement carried a dark shadow: eugenics. Many reformers, including Sanger, argued not only for women's rights but for limiting births among the poor, the disabled, and marginalized groups. Birth control was framed as a way to improve society by reducing undesirable populations. This ugly entanglement complicates the legacy of the movement. Was birth control about liberation or control? About women's freedom or social engineering? The truth is both. And that tension haunts the history of contraception to this day. Clinics, controversy, and courage. Across Europe and America, birth control clinics began to appear. Some were legal, many not. Midwives offered diaphragms. Doctors prescribed pessaries. Activists distributed pamphlets in secret. Each clinic was a battlefield. Police raids, moralist protests, arrests. But also lines of women, poor, working class, desperate, waiting for help. Picture a dim clinic in 1920s London, women in shawls, holding infants, waiting nervously on wooden benches. A nurse shows them rubber diaphragms, explains their use in hushed tones. For these women, knowledge is salvation. The rhythm of the rhythm method. At the same time, Catholic scholars, faced with growing demand, promoted the so-called rhythm method, timing intercourse to avoid fertile days. Based on early studies of ovulation, it offered couples a method consistent with church teaching. But accuracy was poor. Calendars were unreliable. Women's cycles unpredictable. For many, the rhythm method brought not freedom, but failure. Still, it marked the Church's first concession, an acknowledgement that family planning was inevitable. War, soldiers, and condoms. World War I and II transformed contraception. Armies distributed millions of condoms to soldiers not to prevent pregnancies, but to fight venereal disease. Posters warned, "Don't forget, put it on before you put it in." The wars spread condom use across the globe. Soldiers carried them home, and condoms became part of mainstream culture. By mid-century, they were the most widely used contraceptive in the world. The sound of protest and the smell of rubber. The sensory world of early 20th century contraception was vivid. The faint rubber scent of condoms, folded in paper packets. The nervous rustle of pamphlets passed hand to hand. The clang of a police baton as clinics were raided. The chants of suffragettes demanding rights in the streets. It was not just a medical revolution, it was cultural warfare. The courtroom battles. În 1936 S. Court decision, United States ver. One package loosened restrictions on contraceptives for doctors. Slowly, the legal tide began to turn. By the 1950s, birth control was still controversial but increasingly tolerated. Each courtroom victory chipped away at the walls of silence. Each decision opened the door for wider acceptance. Women's voices rising. For centuries, contraception had been a private matter, hidden in kitchens and brothels. Now it was political. Women spoke openly, wrote articles, demanded rights. Pamphlets, newsletters, rallies all carried the same message: without birth control, there could be no equality. In this way, contraception became tied not just to health but to feminism itself. The tragedy beneath the triumph. And yet, the revolution was not universal. Poor women often lacked access. Women of color were disproportionately targeted by coercive sterilization programs. Rural women remained at the mercy of secrecy and stigma. The century's progress carried within it both triumph and tragedy. A clinic at night. Let's end this chapter with a scene. Brooklyn, 1920. A small clinic lit by a single lamp. Margaret Sanger stands at a wooden desk, a line of women outside. She knows the police may raid at any moment. She knows she may be arrested again. But she also knows the women need her. She hands a diaphragm to a trembling young mother, explains its use softly. The woman nods, clutching it like a lifeline. Outside, the city hums with jazz and trolley bells. Inside, in this tiny room, a revolution is unfolding, quiet, fragile, unstoppable. Closing reflection. The early 20th century marks the true beginning of the birth control revolution. Rubber sheaths went mainstream. Clinics opened, pamphlets spread, women fought in courts and in streets. But it was messy. Tainted by eugenics. Shadowed by stigma. Fought tooth and nail by law and church. Still, the trajectory was clear. Contraception was no longer just a secret. It was a movement. And the next chapter, the arrival of the pill, would ignite the greatest transformation yet. Chapter 10, The Pill and the Sexual Revolution. It was a small, unassuming tablet. Round, white, no different to the eye from aspirin or sugar. But in 1960, when the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved it for contraceptive use, the birth control pill became the spark of a cultural explosion. For millennia, women had relied on wool, sponges, herbs, rubber, or sheer luck. For centuries, the responsibility was clumsy, dangerous, or hidden. Now, for the first time in history, there was a pill, silent, discreet, effective. A pill that promised liberation. A pill that would rewrite society. A dream long in the making. The pill was not born overnight. It was the result of decades of activism, science, and defiance. Margaret Sanger, still fighting well into her old age, had long dreamed of a reliable contraceptive under a woman's control. She found an ally in Catherine McCormick, a wealthy philanthropist and suffragist who poured her fortune into funding research. Two scientists, Gregory Pincus and John Rock, developed the formula, synthetic hormones to suppress ovulation. It was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of blocking sperm or interrupting implantation, it prevented the egg from being released in the first place. By 1957, the pill was approved in the U.S. for menstrual disorders. In 1960, the FDA approved it explicitly for contraception. A revolution had begun. Liberation in a tablet. Imagine the impact. A woman swallows a pill in the morning with her coffee. No sponges, no diaphragms, no timing, no negotiations. Quiet, invisible, effective. For the first time, women could decouple sex from fear. Careers could be planned. Marriages delayed. Dreams pursued. The pill wasn't just medicine, it was freedom in chemical form. The sound of rebellion. The 1960s were already a time of upheaval, civil rights, student protests, anti-war demonstrations. Into this storm dropped the pill, offering women control over their bodies like never before. The cultural effects were seismic. College women pursued degrees without fear of unwanted pregnancies. Couples experimented with new kinds of relationships. Feminist movements embraced contraception as central to equality. The phrase, sexual revolution, entered the lexicon. Desire could be pursued more freely, openly, joyfully. Backlash and condemnation. But not everyone celebrated. Religious authorities, especially the Catholic Church, denounced the pill as unnatural and immoral. In 1968, Pope Paul VI issued Humanae Vitae, declaring all artificial contraception sinful. Millions of Catholics disagreed, and many quietly used it anyway, but the official condemnation was absolute. Politicians worried about declining birth rates. Moralists warned of a collapse of the family. The pill became a lightning rod for debates about morality, freedom, and the future of society. The double-edged sword. The pill brought liberation, but also controversy. Early formulations had dangerously high doses of hormones, causing side effects, nausea, depression, blood clots. Women were often not warned of the risks. Doctors sometimes dismissed complaints, prescribing without full consent. The irony was bitter. A drug designed to free women sometimes harmed them, while their voices about those harms were ignored. And yet, despite the risks, women embraced it. The benefits outweighed the dangers for many. The pill became not just a medicine, but a movement. The pill and power. The significance of the pill went far beyond biology. It reshaped power dynamics. In workplaces, women could pursue careers without constant interruption by pregnancy. In relationships, sex was no longer chained to reproduction. In politics, contraception became a central issue of rights and autonomy. Every swallow of the pill was, in its own way, an act of quiet rebellion against centuries of silence and subjugation. The sound of a dorm room in 1965. Picture a dormitory at a university in 1965. Two young women sit cross-legged on a bed, flipping through a package of pills. The tiny tablets clink softly in the blister pack. They whisper, excited, nervous, conspiratorial. "This means I can actually go to law school. This means I don't have to marry right away." The pill wasn't just medicine. It was a future opening before them. The pill across the globe. As the pill spread, it carried both hope and controversy worldwide. In some countries, it was embraced as part of modernization. In others, governments used it coercively, promoting contraception to reduce population growth without respecting women's choices. The pill was both liberation and tool of control, depending on who held the power. The backlash intensifies. By the late 1960s and 70s, the pill had become a symbol of everything conservatives feared: women's independence, sexual freedom, changing family structures. Newspapers ran headlines about promiscuity. Politicians debated restrictions. And yet, demand soared. By 1970, millions of women around the world were using it. For many, no amount of backlash could outweigh the relief it brought. Feminist voices. Feminist activists celebrated the pill as transformative, but also pushed for better safety and informed consent. Books like Our Bodies, Ourselves 1970 demanded that women have the right to understand what they were taking. The pill was not just a drug, it was part of a larger conversation about who controlled women's bodies: doctors, priests, politicians, or women themselves. The pill and the bedroom. The sensory details of the pill were subtle but profound. The soft click of a blister pack. The tiny chalky tablet resting on a tongue. The quiet swallow, barely noticeable, yet life-altering. Unlike every other contraceptive in history, the pill left no trace in the act of sex itself. No sponges, no sheaths, no interruptions. Just desire unbroken. The sexual revolution. The pill was one of the engines of the broader sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s. Alongside changing attitudes toward love, marriage, and gender, it enabled experimentation, freedom, and defiance of traditional norms. It wasn't the only factor. Rock music, youth culture, feminism, civil rights, and counterculture all played their part, but the pill was central. Would the sexual revolution have happened without it? Perhaps. But not in the same way. The pill gave it momentum, credibility, permanence. Closing the scene. Let's end this chapter in a suburban kitchen in 1962. A young woman takes a pill with her morning coffee. Her husband kisses her on the cheek as he leaves for work. To him, it is just another morning. To her, it is freedom, power, possibility. Outside, the world churns with debates and condemnations. Inside, in this small ritual, a quiet revolution unfolds. Closing reflection. The pill transformed everything. It gave women unprecedented control over reproduction. It fueled the sexual revolution. It reshaped culture, politics, and relationships. But it was not simple. It carried risks. It provoked backlash. It was entangled with coercion and inequality. Still, the significance cannot be overstated. For the first time in history, contraception was not clumsy, hidden, or unreliable. It was a pill, a daily active choice, swallowed with water, carried in the bloodstream. As we move forward, we will see the diversification of methods, IUDs, implants, surgical sterilizations, and more. The 20th century did not stop at the pill. It kept inventing, experimenting, pushing forward. But everything that followed was built on the foundation of this tiny tablet, this spark that lit a revolution. Chapter 11. Technology meets the body. The pill had opened the door. By the 1970s, millions of women across the world were swallowing it daily. But science did not stop there. Laboratories, clinics, and corporations began to imagine new ways to reshape fertility. This was the era when contraception left the realm of herbs, sponges, and rubber, and entered the circuitry of modern medicine. Devices inserted into the womb. Hormones released by plastic rods under the skin. Surgeries that permanently altered reproductive systems. If the pill symbolized freedom in a tablet, these new methods symbolized something else, technology woven directly into the body. The IUD, a device in the womb. The intrauterine device known simply as the IUD was not a brand new invention. Variants had existed as early as the 1920s. But in the second half of the 20th century, IUDs came into their own. Small T-shaped devices made of plastic and copper or laced with hormones were inserted directly into the uterus. Their effect: prevent sperm from fertilizing eggs or eggs from implanting. For women, the IUD was both a marvel and a terror. On one hand, it offered years of protection without daily pills. No routines, no interruptions. On the other, insertion was painful, side effects could be harsh, and stories of complications spread fear. One infamous case, the Dalkin Shield of the 1970s. Marketed aggressively, it caused infections, infertility, and even deaths. Lawsuits followed. Trust in IUDs collapsed for a generation. And yet, the principle endured. Safer IUDs returned in later decades. Today, they remain one of the most effective contraceptives in the world. Surgical solutions, vasectomy, and tubal ligation. While most contraceptives still fell to women, surgery offered more permanent solutions for both sexes. Vasectomy, a quick outpatient procedure severing the tubes that carry sperm. Reliable, simple, safe. Tubal ligation, surgical closure of the fallopian tubes, preventing eggs from meeting sperm. Far more invasive, often requiring anesthesia and recovery. The cultural difference is telling. Vasectomy was promoted as simple and practical, yet many men resisted it, framing fertility as part of their masculinity. Tubal ligation, though more dangerous, became far more common, yet again placing the burden on women. Imagine the scene: a woman in a hospital bed after childbirth, still recovering, agreeing to a tubal ligation offered by a doctor. Relief mixes with exhaustion. Across town, a man debates for years whether to schedule a vasectomy, fearing it will diminish him. The imbalance is stark. Hormones in new forms, beyond the pill. Science also sought to deliver hormones in new ways. Depo-Provera injections, a shot every 3 months releasing hormones steadily. Effective but sometimes controversial, with side effects like weight gain and mood swings. Implants, small rods placed under the skin, releasing hormones for years at a time. Discreet, long-lasting, nearly invisible. Patches and rings, newer innovations, delivering hormones through the skin or vaginal walls. Each new method promised convenience, but carried the same themes: side effects, controversy, and debates over women's health versus women's freedom. The Global South and the ethics of experimentation. Here lies one of the most troubling chapters in contraceptive history. In countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, governments often supported by Western agencies promoted contraception as part of population control campaigns. Sometimes, women were offered new methods without full information. Sometimes, they were coerced. Depo-Provera, for example, was widely tested on women in developing countries before being approved in the West. IUDs were promoted aggressively in poor communities. Sterilization campaigns, often targeting marginalized groups, sometimes blurred the line between choice and coercion. The tension between empowerment and exploitation is unavoidable. Was contraception giving women freedom? Or was it being used to control populations deemed too large or undesirable by powerful nations? The history is not clean. The language of technology. By the late 20th century, the very language of contraception shifted. No longer just herbs or sponges, but devices, implants, hormonal systems. The body itself became a site for technological intervention. Plastic, copper, synthetic hormones, all woven into flesh, blood, and cycles. The intimacy is staggering. To imagine a small T-shaped device in the uterus, a rod beneath the skin, a shot that alters hormones for months, it is medicine, yes, but also intrusion. For some, liberation. For others, loss of autonomy. The sound of the clinic. Picture a clinic in 1985. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead. A young woman sits nervously on an examination table, paper crinkling beneath her. A nurse holds a sterile package, an IUD. Metal glints under the light. The insertion is quick but painful. The woman bites her lip. Tears sting her eyes. The nurse murmurs reassurance. Minutes later, it is done. For the woman, this single procedure may mean 5 years of freedom from pregnancy. Relief washes over her, mingled with lingering unease. This is the experience of contraception in the technological age, efficiency entwined with vulnerability. Male contraceptives, the dream deferred. Scientists throughout the late 20th century experimented with male contraceptives, hormonal pills, gels, reversible vasectomies. Headlines promised breakthroughs. The male pill is 5 years away. And yet, it never arrived. Side effects, lack of funding, and cultural resistance stalled progress. Society, it seemed, was still more comfortable placing the responsibility on women. The absence itself is telling. The technology exists. The will does not. The smell of sterile plastic, the silence of autonomy. The sensory world of late 20th century contraception was clinical. The sterile smell of alcohol swabs before an injection. The faint tug of skin as an implant is inserted. The plastic click of a pill dispenser. The quiet relief or unease after leaving the clinic. Desire and medicine had never been so entwined. Liberation and controversy. By the 1980s and 90s, contraception had become part of mainstream healthcare in much of the world. Clinics offered options. Governments distributed devices. Activists fought for access. But controversy never faded. Debates raged over safety, morality, coercion, and responsibility. Every new method carried both hope and suspicion. And yet, the trajectory was clear. Technology was becoming inseparable from the body. The womb, the bloodstream, the skin each became a canvas for medical invention. Closing the scene. Let's close with a simple image: a woman opening her medicine cabinet in 1990. Inside are choices, pills, a blister pack of injections, an appointment card for her next implant replacement. She pauses, considers, makes her choice. This is the heart of the matter: choice. Imperfect, contested, sometimes painful, but hers. Closing reflection. The late 20th century marks the technological conquest of contraception. IUDs, implants, injections, surgeries all wove science into intimacy. It was progress, yes, but complicated progress. The same methods that empowered some women were forced upon others. The same technologies that offered freedom also carried risks and pain. And yet, the story moved forward. Desire had always sought escape from destiny. Technology gave it new tools. As we enter the 21st century, the story continues toward male pills, always 5 years away, toward digital fertility trackers, toward nanotech implants. The question remains: how far can we go in separating sex from reproduction? And at what cost? Chapter 12. The Future of Contraception. The story of contraception is not finished. It never is. Each age has believed itself modern, advanced, enlightened, and each has been proven partial, incomplete. We stand now in the 21st century with the pill, IUDs, implants, condoms, sterilizations, and injections all at our disposal. And yet, the conversation feels unfinished. Technology keeps pressing forward. Questions keep multiplying. So what comes next? What might contraception look like in the decades ahead? And what does that tell us about ourselves? The perennial promise of the male pill. Let's begin with the great almost of modern contraception, the male pill. Since the 1970s, scientists have promised that a hormonal pill for men was just around the corner, 5 years away. That phrase became almost a joke. Clinical trials showed promise: pills, injections, gels that suppressed sperm production. But obstacles always intervened. Side effects deemed unacceptable. Pharmaceutical companies unwilling to invest. Cultural resistance, men reluctant to shoulder responsibility long left to women. The irony is sharp. Women have endured decades of nausea, weight gain, depression, even blood clots from hormonal contraceptives. Yet when similar side effects appeared in men's trials, research often stalled. Will it ever arrive? Perhaps. A few experimental methods such as reversible gels injected into the vas deferens still flicker with possibility. But for now, the male pill remains a ghost, haunting conferences and headlines. Remote-controlled implants. Imagine this, a chip implanted beneath the skin, releasing hormones slowly over years. A woman can switch it on or off with a remote control. This isn't science fiction, it has been tested. The idea of digital contraceptives, programmable and discreet, opens new frontiers. But also new fears. Who controls the switch? Could it be hacked? Could governments or partners pressure women into using or disabling it? The future, it seems, carries not just new technology but new vulnerabilities. Nanotech and beyond. Researchers are also exploring nanotechnology, microscopic particles that could deliver contraceptive drugs with precision. Vaginal gels designed to block both sperm and HIV. Smart rings that monitor fertility and release hormones as needed. The possibilities are dazzling, almost futuristic. And yet the history of contraception urges caution. Every new device has promised freedom. Many have carried hidden risks. The lesson is clear: technology alone cannot solve the politics of reproduction. Fertility awareness in the age of AI. Alongside high-tech devices, a quieter revolution is unfolding: digital fertility tracking. Apps now monitor menstrual cycles, temperature, and hormone levels. Algorithms predict fertile days with precision. For some women, this offers a natural, hormone-free alternative to the pill. Picture a woman checking her phone each morning, the screen glowing with data. Low fertility today. Safe. Or high fertility window, take precautions. It is modern, sleek, empowering. But also fragile, dependent on data privacy, algorithmic accuracy, and the honesty of partners. Would you trust your fertility to an app? Millions already do. Contraception and global inequality. Even as wealthy nations experiment with nanotech and apps, vast inequalities remain. In parts of Africa and Asia, access to basic contraception, condoms, pills, IUDs, is still limited. Millions of women face pregnancies they cannot afford or survive. The future of contraception is not just about new gadgets, it is about access. Who gets the technology? Who is left behind? The gap between promise and reality may widen. A world where some women control reproduction with microchips, while others still rely on risky herbs. The ethics of control. As biotechnology advances, so do the ethical questions. Who controls contraception, the individual, the state, or corporations? History offers warnings: eugenics campaigns, forced sterilizations, coercive population programs. The risk of reproductive technology being used not for freedom, but for control, remains very real. Consider this: what if a government required implants for all young women to be switched off only with permission? Science fiction? Perhaps. But echoes of such coercion already exist. The future of contraception is not just medical, it is political. A bedroom in 2050. Let's imagine. The year is 2050. A young couple lies in bed. On the nightstand is no condom, no blister pack of pills. Instead, the woman wears a thin patch on her arm, releasing hormones through the skin, synced to an app on her phone. She checks the screen. Protected. In another city, a man receives a quarterly injection that suppresses his sperm count, reversible with a countershot. In another corner of the world, a woman logs onto a government portal to request her implant deactivated so she can try for a child. She waits, nervous for approval. 3 futures. 3 possibilities. 1 empowering, 1 cooperative, 1 chilling. Which will we choose? The sound of tomorrow. The sensory details of future contraception may be subtle. The soft vibration of a smartphone notifying a fertile window. The sterile click of a microchip implant beneath the skin. The faint whir of a nanotech dispenser releasing hormones invisibly. The future won't sound like wool plugs or vinegar sponges. It will sound like machines, apps, and data streams. Final reflection, the eternal dance. Looking back, the story of contraception is the story of humanity itself: desire, fear, power, and ingenuity. From crocodile dung in Egypt to silk sheaths in Venice. From pennyroyal tea in a cottage to pills in suburban kitchens. From copper coils in the womb to algorithms predicting ovulation. Each method reflects its age, its science, its politics, its hopes, its cruelties. Contraception has always been more than biology. It is culture, struggle, survival. And the future? It will be no different. Technology will dazzle us with possibilities. But the questions: who controls, who benefits, who suffers, will remain. Perhaps that is the final truth. Contraception is not about objects or devices. It is about choice. And choice has always been the most dangerous, most radical invention of all.